Good afternoon. My name's Oliver Morden. I'll be chairing this panel on the risks of overshooting the Paris targets, the risks of, and also reducing those risks, either by safeguarding the targets or by finding ways to reduce the harms done beyond those targets. We have a terrific panel for you today with Agnes Kalibata, who should be joining us by video. I'm not seeing her at the moment, but who is the Director of the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, subject close to my heart, and a former Minister of Agriculture in the Rwandan government. Ines Camiloni, who is a professor at the University of Buenos Aires, where she works on climate change research, and also acts as a communicator and ambassador for the discussion of climate change. And I should disclose an interest that some of Ines's work is funded by an NGO that I'm on the board of. Pascal Lamy probably needs no introduction, but just in case, he is the chair of the Climate Overshoot Commission, a high-level body that's been put together under the auspices of the Paris Peace Forum to look at exactly these questions of overshoot and of what can be done to avoid, but also to get through an overshoot beyond the goals of the Paris Agreement. One of his fellow commissioners, I should have said, of course, that Dr. Kalibata is also on that commission, and so is Arantxa González-Laya, who is the Dean of the Paris School for International Affairs, a former Foreign Minister of Spain, and a former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. And last but in no way least, another former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, János Pastor, who is the Director of the Carnegie Climate Governance Initiative, C2G, and who has worked in these sort of areas for an almost embarrassingly long time, and including working on the Brundtland Report and working as the Executive Secretary of the Secretary General's high-level panel on global sustainability about 10 years ago. So those are your panelists. And yes, and I see you, Agnes. Hello, hi. I actually wanted to start, I'm going to ask a few questions of people up here, and then I hope that I'm going to be moderately strict on them with respect to time, and that will allow me to throw the floor open to you for some questions later on. The panel lasts for an hour. So the first question is for you, Agnes, is really, what does an overshoot mean for African farming and African farmers? How different does the climate issue look if you start worrying about an overshoot of the Paris targets?
Did you get the question?
Just wanted to check. Did you get that question, Agnes? Okay, I can repeat the question, and while I repeat the question, maybe someone could try and get a sound from Agnes's mic. So, Agnes, I was wondering if you could address the question of how different does the situation look for African farming and African farmers when one looks at the climate crisis in the context of a likely overshoot of the Paris targets?
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes. I'm delighted to say.
Very good, very good. Good. It's been a struggle, but good. I'm here, so let me try to answer your question. So when you look at what is happening here on the African continent, I guess the easiest way to put it is we are very sure that the whole climate change thing is going to be here for the longest time. We've seen that for the last 5 years now, we're having droughts in Eastern Africa. In West Africa, you see the kind of floods that you're seeing. So how are farmers coping with this? Farmers are moving, for starters. In some places, people are moving to go to places where they can be able to find food, because as you can see, in parts of Kenya, either they wait where they are at and they get relief aid, or they move to places where they can be able to find food. And you will see that right now, you see that with the number of cows now you see roaming around looking for food. And that is what is beginning to define farmers' lives. Just complete failure, and then they have to they have to move around. But I think there are other things they are beginning to see. They are extremely comfortable to take up new ideas and new solutions. That's probably what I would say. That when we have technologies that seem to be offering solutions, drought-tolerant varieties, new crops that or crops that they have always had but hadn't given so much priority, they are now more comfortable to try those and more willing to try those. They will do anything they can to be able to have the next crop. Of course, then the other thing is really thinking through what type of insurance mechanisms government can put in place to support these farmers. I don't feel like there's enough on the ground to give them options, and I feel like they are in that place where they would be willing to take up options, but you don't see enough of those. So for me, the question is, what do you want them to do? What do you want them to do? They have no rain. They have their way of life has been completely destroyed. They are moving to be able to find new ways of living, or they are going to have to take up new technologies if they come in fast enough, or new ways of doing business. In some of the areas we're working with in Kenya, for example, farmers are willing to look at regenerative agriculture and take up regenerative agriculture, because we're telling them if you mulch your land, you hold moisture for longer. So I would say that what I'm seeing now is really real openness to interest to take up technologies, mostly because that's the only thing that is available to them now.
Thank you very much. Now, good point. Thank you very much. Ines, thank you for reminding me to use a microphone, Ines. Ines, I wondered if you could just sketch out some of the things that people thinking about the overshoot have to think about that haven't previously been large parts of the climate discourse, and I'm thinking particularly of sunlight management and of carbon subtraction.
Okay, thank you for the question. There are different policies to work against the climate crisis. These policies are related to some kind of interventions on the climate system. One of these is the carbon dioxide removal. This is an intervention that acts on the carbon dioxide that is already in the atmosphere. So it looks just for the reduction of the concentrations of the carbon that is already there in the atmosphere. And the climate system already has sinks of carbon dioxide. One of them, the most important, are the oceans, and the other one is through the biosphere. But carbon dioxide removal refers to some more technological idea to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. You can do that again through forestation, reforestation, and also afforestation, but also it includes some technological measures to do that. And to reach the 1.5 target, the scenarios we already have include the CDR, the carbon dioxide removal, as a key issue to reach this target. And we also have another kind of intervention that in some ways also to produce some climate change, but in this case intentionally, that is the solar radiation modification. And the idea is, for example, by introducing small particles into the stratosphere to reflect more sunlight back to the space. And in this way, you can cool the surface. And the other strategy is related to make the clouds, the marine clouds, more brightened, with the same idea to reflect more energy back to the space. These two strategies related to solar radiation modification have different spatial impact. The solar radiation modification can have a global impact. You can reduce the global temperature. It depends on how much particles you introduce into the stratosphere, the amount of the cooling you can produce. And in the case of the marine cloud browning, is more related to a regional impact.
And tell us a little bit about your research into this.
Well, I'm working on the potential impacts of solar radiation modification by the introduction of these aerosols into the stratosphere, the impacts in South America and in the southeastern South America, to explore the hydrological impacts that we may have in this region, which depend on water availability for many economic activities, and also for the production of hydroelectricity. So any changes in water availability in the main rivers we have in La Plata River Basin is quite relevant for the energy production and for the other agriculture activities we have there. And it's also the most populated region in South America. So the potential impacts of solar radiation modification in that region, it could be risky or it could have also benefits. Mm-hmm. So my research is related to this, to explore these potential impacts.
Thank you. Pascal, in the context of both the first, the challenge for new technological responses and the options that Ines has just outlined, could you say a little bit about how the idea for the Climate Overshoot Commission came about? What was it that you were seeking to do that you did not see being done?
Well, the idea of the Global Climate Overshoot Commission came from the Paris Peace Forum. It was born here last year in the 4th edition, after a series of conversations, workshops, panels. And we thought at the Paris Peace Forum that the issue of what happens if we overshoot 1.5 needs to be looked at seriously. I think in the meantime, the notion that we unfortunately will overshoot 1.5 is now much more commonplace than a year ago, unfortunately. The IPCC says that this is highly likely, which for anybody understanding words means, with the precaution scientists always put on what they say in the IPCC, we are there. That's the bad news. There is a bit of a good news that on the other side of the range is going a bit down. This one, unfortunately, is going up, so the range is shrinking, but the problem is not with a part of the range that goes down, that's great. The problem is with the part of the range that goes up. And our view was, and remains, that while we've been working with a sort of mindset that remaining below 1.5, that's where we've been going with our minds since 2015, 7 years ago. It's not going to happen. So we have to re-look at what do we do with climate change, with global warming, given the impacts that appear more and more. So that's the fundamental idea. We have to reopen the concept we have of adaptation, carbon removal, and geoengineering, i.e. SRM, solar radiation modification. So we have to reopen these boxes on which we've been working with a certain mindset. We have to reopen it with another mindset. So that's the motivation. And I'm personally now at a part of my life, which is the end. There is a beginning and there is an end, as we all know. And at a stage where I really want to leave no stone unturned. It wasn't that urgent when I was 20 years younger. It's becoming extremely urgent. And this is why I've accepted to spend time with people we've gathered and who a priori share this view that we have to relook at that. And that's why we have composed the commission. And Adrien Abécassi, who's the policy guy at the Paris Peace Forum, and Jesse Reynolds, who's the now operating officer of this commission, have clubbed with me to make this work. We have composed a group of old monkeys, my kind, who've got a lot of international experience and who have a capacity to think across silos in these issues, of younger people like Agnès, which we heard, like Minister Kar from Pakistan, like Arantxa Gonzalez of NGO, like the European Climate Foundation. So a rather typical Paris Peace Forum sort of soup, multi-stakeholder coming from various horizons, and with a specific attention on a good north-south balance, in my view, a good north-south balance between a slight unbalance on the side of the south. Because on this issue, this is what really matters now. And we can see that since the beginning of this Sharm el-Sheikh COP27. The big issue coming up, and as if it wasn't there before, is what about the global south dimension of this issue? So we've tried to anticipate in the way we compose the commission in order to make sure that the views that are expressed, and we are in the course of this work. We started last summer. We will probably finish summer 2023, so we still have quite a way to go in listening to this variety of views, and I'm trying to handle this in a way that each and every commission member can express his or her views, freely discuss it, and some of our discussions are quite hot. So that's the motivation, and that's the format of what we are after. Like all these initiatives, I do not know where we will land. And it's the charm and the risk of this sort of thing. It's in the making. There are already a few things that have appeared, and we might go back to that, but work ongoing.
And what's the time frame for that work?
Time frame for that work is that we will try to have a set of recommendations by summer next year, so that we can test their flotation capacity at the time where the UN system is very active, which is the autumn period, which usually, by the way, precedes the Paris Peace Forum, which is more end of autumn, and then we'll see how we articulate this with the COP28.
Arantxa, I was asking. Oh, yes, thank you. Microphone. Arantxa, I was interested. You've been involved in foreign affairs at various different levels, various different capacities for some time. How different are the issues raised by thinking about the overshoot from the issues of that people have been, the issues, the mindset, the box, as Pascal had it, that people have previously been thinking in?
I mean, first, let me say that the issues don't change. The issues are the same as how do we reduce emissions and how do we transform in the effort of reducing emissions, how do we transform our economies and our societies, the two sides, the production, the consumption, into a production and consumption patterns that are more compatible with living in the planet that we have. And for now, unless Elon Musk invents another planet somewhere, this is the planet we live in. So the challenge doesn't change, but what can change is the way we look at the problem, the way we look at the challenge. And maybe the value that this format, which is in the spirit of the Paris Peace Forum, a new form of multilateralism, maybe what this brings is also a new way to accelerate this transition on climate change. Now, I want to build on Pascal's signal. This commission that will look at reducing emissions is composed of people that have been there, right? Or that are there. People that are in government, people that have been in government, people that are international organizations that have been, that are in the science. So the beauty is building a context that allows for a fresher look and doing so in a manner that is diverse. And diversity has many different dimensions. Diversity is not just north-south. That's a bit of a simplistic view of, in my view, diversity. Because in the north, you've got the US and you've got China. In the north, you've got, at least geographically, Russia and Japan, also the European Union. In the south, you've got India and Kiribati. So the key is diversity. Diversity brings representation. And representation is important because at the end of the day, transforming an economy and transforming society requires every hand on deck. And you don't get every hand on deck unless they feel that they are being part of crafting the solution. So diversity is representation. Diversity is agency. It's working with those that are going to help change what's happening on the ground. Diversity is going to be fairness, which is a big part also of this conversation. And diversity is also going to be new solutions, because it's this diversity that will help us in building this new solution. So I like a lot this new way of doing multilateralism. It's less top-down, it's messier, it's more horizontal, is more going back and forth, is drawing very heavily on science, something that we should not forget, drawing strongly on science, but also building a political energy that can help us advance these transformations that are required, and as we just heard, are required now in a, let's say, faster and greater. And for that, we need a lot of political energy, which hopefully processes like the Overshoot Commission can help us mobilize.
Thank you. Janos, I wanted to ask you, you've been active in this area, this particular area, for what, about 4 or 5 years, is that right? When was the Carnegie, when was C2G set up?
40 years, actually, but this particular initiative, 6 years.
Right. And so tell us a little bit about what C2G does and how it fits into this broadening of discussions about responses to climate change.
Thank you. So I will try to respond with 3 brief points. First, on the framing that we use, and we start with essentially what's the question of this session. And we recognize from the IPCC, which said very clearly in the latest reports that the likelihood of passing the 1.5 is higher than not passing. And we also recognize the more recent UNEP report, which says there is no credible pathways out there to maintain the 1.5 degree goal. Put it in another language, the world is going to get hotter. It's going to get quite a bit hotter. We don't know how high it will go, and we don't know how long it's going to last, but it's going to be there. And the world better get ready to deal with the risks of that hotter temperature. That doesn't mean we give up all the effort that we have done on emission reductions. That is still the number 1 priority. And if we don't do all that, it's going to get a lot worse and a lot longer. And therefore, the priority is still emission reductions. That's the number 1 priority. However, one has to deal with the temperature overshoot. And the question is how. And fundamentally, there are only 2 sets of issues that one can do with overshoot risks. The first is massively, and I mean massively, increase efforts at adaptation, building resilience, and yes, making resources available to those who are suffering from loss and damage today. The three are different actions, but they're related, because if you do more of one, then you can do less of the other. But on the other hand, the other solution is to cool the planet using solar radiation modification. These are essentially the two things one can do. And the question is, how does the world deal with this? So that's our frame. And the frame has to be looking at a world that is going to be 2.5 degrees centigrade warmer, and the risks of that versus the risks of using a new technique that will perhaps help to reduce the temperatures, but will introduce new risks. And how does one balance the risks of one versus the other? Which is going to be a better world, which is going to be a not so good world, or a less worse world? So in that context, what we do, our mission is to get these issues on the agenda of governments. And we do it in an impartial manner so that we are not promoting these technologies, we're not against them, we're just saying to governments, you need to deal with it. And what we have done is we have focused very much on the sort of the top part of the intergovernmental process to get the UN General Assembly to actually begin to address these issues in one way or another by the end of next year. And so for that, we have engaged with a whole lot of countries individually, bilaterally, in New York, in the missions, in capitals, and to try to engage them in this discussion to catalyze one or more of them to actually formally bring this to the General Assembly one way or the other. Now, in that process, we're also engaging a lot with intergovernmental and non-governmental processes that are dealing with these issues. And the idea is to try to catalyze as many processes as possible that together will help governments to actually address these issues. Thank you.
Sounds slightly, though, some of that you're talking about maybe ought to be done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Are they asleep on the switch?
No. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has a hugely important role to assess the science. And that's what they do, and that's what they need to do. And they're doing some of this, and they will probably continue to do that. But they are not there to make recommendations. They're not there to make broader assessment of these. That's something else. And so, yes, the IPCC has a hugely important role to play, and will continue to do that, but that's not enough.
Thank you very much. And I was very struck by what you were saying about balancing things, and it really, to me, stressed what Arantxa was saying before you about representation, because these are choices which you don't want to have made without your voice in the room. I'm going to come back first to Inez and then to Agnes. And Inez, since you're here as a researcher with these commissioners and this influential and charming audience, what do they need to know about the solar modification things that you're doing? What are the things that people, leaving aside perhaps the technology, what do they need to know when they're thinking about how to make decisions about this?
What we need to know is that solar radiation modification doesn't mean to put the Earth, the planet, into some kind of time machine. We will not going back to the climate we used to have 30, 50 or 100 years ago. It will produce a new climate that we already don't know exactly how it will be. We have some indications from climate simulations, but maybe we will need some at least small-scale outdoor experiments. But it will be a new climate because even if we drop temperature by, I don't know, 0.5 degree, we will still have a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. We will still have much less ice and melting glaciers in the Earth. So this is why we will have a new climate. But up to now, what we know is that extreme temperatures will drop. We will have less frequent and severe heat waves, and also precipitation, extreme precipitation events. But also, we will have an uneven distribution of other impacts. For example, there will be impacts on the water cycle. In some regions, it will rain more with solar radiation modification. In other regions, we will have a reduction in precipitation, and this will produce also an even risk on human health and fruit production, and also on ecosystems. We don't know these potential impacts and risks. This is why we need more research, and this is a key issue before planning an operational deployment of solar radiation modification.
I think that's really an interesting point, that when we're talking about overshoot, it's not a one-dimensional thing where you go too far and then come back like a pendulum. You're actually going off into some strange new two-dimensional climate space which we haven't seen before. Agnes, is Agnes still here with us? Hi, thank you. I didn't have you on screen. I was going to say, I was asking Inessa about solar radiation management or solar radiation modification, or just solar geoengineering. And I was thinking farming is humankind's closest, most intimate, certainly, interaction with the biosphere. And how does that knowledge base and that experience, how does that feed into the idea of nature-based solutions as a way of drawing down carbon dioxide? Okay, we're not hearing you at the moment. There's no... Yeah, we're not hearing you at the moment. Manon, is there anything we can do here? Okay. If someone can try and work that out, because I very much wanted an answer to that. But I want to go back, and maybe I could direct a question to Arantxa. We were talking about, and it is, of course, a simplistic notion, but we were talking about the fulcrum of North and South. And, of course, one of the things, and we know that our colleagues, and those of us who've been in Sharm or are going to Sharm, are very aware about how that relation has, in the context of climate, come to be seen very much through a financial lens in international negotiations. Do you think discussions in the context that the Commission is having, in the context of the overshoot, is there a way of changing that way of looking at things, or is that just a problem that the world has to get through before anything else can happen?
No, there is obviously, I'm not sure that the Overshoot Commission, which is a commission that needs to look at what can be done in the three big baskets that Pascal mentioned, but for sure, in whatever we do, there is a question of financing. Mm-hmm. Who is going to pay the bill, and how will the bill be paid? Is this going to be with own resources that countries will generate? Some of them are coming out of an enormous debt crisis, COVID, and now food, fuel, and fertilizer. So some countries have very limited fiscal space. Others didn't cause the problem, or are on the short end of the stick. So they are saying, well, there is a bit of a fairness issue here. Why should I now be paying the bill of something that I didn't contribute to do? Some have the financial means, and these means are parked, quote unquote, in financial institutions that are not using them to the full extent. So there is a big, then we've got a financial industry that can be repurposed to make sure that it is adapted to the goal of reducing emissions. There was a very interesting green bond emission in Uruguay recently, where the performance of the bond is linked to the performance of the country in reducing emissions, with UNDP being the guarantor, the independent referee that will ensure that the results are not just greenwashing, so to speak. So there is a big financial discussion to be had, which is about means, which is about fairness, which is about building this new economy, also with one of its main actors, those that are managing capital, that also needs to change. And my sense is that now we are realizing, especially now with a confluence of different mega crises, how important it is to bring this conversation to a different level.
And do you think that, thinking of the solar modification technology that Ines was talking about, or possibly the carbon sequestration, how do you think that that should or could influence discussions about loss and damage if you have, as it were, an independent lever that might possibly be seen as a way of addressing loss?
So again, first there is a conversation about technology that we need to have. And it's also an interesting new chapter. But I'm not, so I think there is going to be in this conversation a legacy issue that looking into the future and projecting ourselves in terms of technology for the future will not do away with. Now, it may change the dynamic in the future, but right now we've got a legacy issue that we need to deal with.
Thanks very much. And Agnes, we have you back, I hope. And so my question was about the intimate knowledge of the land and the things that live in and on and with it that you gain from farming. How do you see that as feeding into these ideas that people talk about of nature-based solutions to carbon management?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Very good. I'm so sorry. Listen, one of the things that maybe having listened to the other speakers that I wanted to call to your attention is people are talking about this stuff like there's a future, it's futuristic, we will do this, we'll do this, we'll do that. When this happens, we'll do this. Climate change is here. People are living through climate change every day, and the farmers we live with, this is why I was saying yesterday, they're migrating. I don't even see from a farming perspective what role technology would play if they don't have rain or they're indebted underwater. So I just wanted to underscore what Pascal said around we need to really focus on the issue of fixing this problem, because much as it's not a south-north issue here, it is a problem of countries living in the south. Today, like I said earlier, a number of countries have not seen rain for the last 5 years. We have, you know very well, we have millions of people that are going hungry. So for us, it's not we will, it's now. And in terms of nature-based solutions, under what circumstances? So yes, I will give you the theoretical part of nature-based solutions. We can increase soil we can increase carbon soil. From a food system perspective, we know that. We do regenerative agriculture. We've started doing some of that where it's possible, and we increase soil carbon. We can reforest and regenerate some of the lost land and ensure that we have more tree cover, and we are able to ensure that works towards reducing carbon. We can ensure that the farmers that have livestock are finding ways of reducing emissions from that part of what we are doing. But let me tell you something. We need to be, this is the time we need to double down on adaptation. If we want these problems to be fixed by nature-based solutions, we need to equip farmers. Poverty is the biggest degrader. Farmers that don't have means will use the environment. So there are no better nature-based solutions when farmers have no means to engage with them. So yes, we know the theoretical part, we know what could happen ideally when things are working, but under what circumstances today are they going to work? So I just feel like we are hearing this stuff around overshoot, we are hearing this stuff around what could go wrong, we are hearing Pascal's warning around where we are at 2 degrees, we have no coral reefs. At 2 degrees, we lose 30% and more biodiversity. At 2 degrees, there's so much that goes wrong. And for Africa, already we have 60 million people that are hungry, real hungry in famine. What much more can we do? So I really just want to underscore that it is not a future problem. It's a problem now, and we need to address it now. That's why I love being on the Overshoot Commission, because if there are solutions outside what we've been able to do, because what we've been able to do has not worked enough. And I'm sorry I'm sounding pessimistic, but I live with people who are starving. I understand what it means today. So yes, we will do reverse reforestation and plant trees. Yes, but under what circumstances? Which farmers will do that? So I need you to understand that the tone here is a tone of somberness, and because we have COP27 going on, we cannot talk about this like it's any other time. We need to come through on the things we said would come through on. I hope I have answered your question.
I think you have, and gone happily well beyond it. But I mean, centering us on what is actually happening now, how bad have the impacts already been on agricultural productivity?
The question is to me, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So at least again, speaking here from an African perspective, since 2014, yields have been declining, right? Across the continent in general. And it will continue to be like that. Since 2 years ago, major parts of the continent have significant challenges in terms of finding food. That's why you see there's a whole of emergency. And yes, the Ukraine crisis has contributed to this. The Russia-Ukraine crisis has contributed to this. And yes, COVID-19 has contributed to this. But underlying that is the undermining of farmers' capability to be able to cope. Because COVID-19, most Africans survived COVID-19 because we still had some form of coping mechanism. So the combination of the inability of, or the combination of the erosion that happens at different levels, government levels, business levels, and farm level, really contributes to a whole lot of erosion. And now with the fertilizer crisis and less fertilizers making it to the farm, there's real decrease in yield, and hopefully, as we get challenged, we are also coming up and finding solutions to deal with these problems. And again, many of us are pegging our hopes on COP27, the fact that it is happening in Africa, and the fact that these challenges are happening here, and the fact that yield erosion in Africa is not 50%, it's between 50 and 100%. When you lose a crop, we are hoping that people can really take this seriously and understand that there's no Africa, there's no situation where Africa can survive a 2-degree world. It's just difficult for me to see.
Thank you. That sense of limitation makes me think, in that report of the high-level panel on global development, there was talk about how to develop while respecting planetary boundaries. Do you feel that we now have basically broken planetary boundaries, that that's no longer a thing that we can do? That report that you were the executive talks about development while respecting planetary boundaries. Do you feel that part of the Overshoot Commission, or part of the concept of overshoot, is learning to live when you've broken those boundaries?
Well, we are breaking these boundaries one after the other, so we have to learn how to live with them and try to bring them back if we overpass them. And the challenge we see on the climate front, and that was clear back then, is just that now we know we're overpassing, is that while we develop a new way, a sustainable way of living, doing our economy, our agriculture, all those, and our lifestyles, while we turn that into a sustainable future, we have to fix the problems that we have created. Clean up, it's like when you throw away garbage, you have to pick it up. If you mess up the atmosphere, you have to clean it up. And cleaning up in this sense means massive carbon dioxide removal to bring the concentrations down, and possibly, I say possibly because we don't know yet, but possibly we may need to do something else to keep the temperature below a certain level while we do all this. And that's the challenge, these two different things. One is to be on a sustainable path, and the other is to clean up the mess that we have created.
There's an interesting thing, though, and I want to come to you, Pascal, on this. When you say we have created, and as Arancha pointed out, some of us have created more mess than others. One of the issues that theorists, at least, always go on about in debates about mitigation, about reducing emissions, is the problem of free riders. One of the things that's striking about the various things that people look at in the adaptation, in the overshoot world, which is sort of like massively enhanced adaptation or a large-scale air capture or solar geoengineering. These are all things that don't have the same sort of free rider problem in quite the same way. Does that make the sort of thinking that you do in your new box outside the old box different?
No, certainly, and you're absolutely right that the free rider issue is different in mitigation, adaptation, removal, or SRM. And this is part of a very complex equation, which is why we need a sort of governance angle. To put it very simply, we need to bring new elements on the table so that we stimulate a public conversation, including, by the way, with the younger generation, and we have a specific youth forum which we are organizing in order to dialogue with the members of the Commission. There's one thing that where there'll be zero new, which is that priority is with mitigation. That's our common article of faith. That's the number one. Okay, but this being said, we know that so far the trajectory, the NDCs, what we know will not lead us there, hence back to looking at the three other sort of fallback options. They all raise different issues in tech, in economic models, and in governance, and in different proportions. And the governance part of that is directly linked to this free rider effect. We don't really have a governance problem for adaptation. We have an economic problem with resources, but we don't have a serious governance problem, and we don't have a serious tech problem. We know what nature-based solutions are about, and we know that more industrial-based solutions are at. So that's the sort of simple, simplistic geometry of adaptation. If you look at carbon removal, we don't have a governance problem. We have an economic model problem, and we have a tech medium problem, because we're not sure that we have enough tech to stabilize economic models. On geoengineering, we have a tiny economic problem, because that's cheap, very cheap as compared to the others. We have a tech issue, and we are discussing with scientists whether SRM is about cloud in the stratosphere or about ocean, disseminating ocean pellets on the ocean, or whether, as some say, we should have an annual temporary cloud over each of the poles, which is one solution which is advocated by some. You put a cloud during the solar, during the polar summer, and then you remove it, and doing it during the polar summer avoids the melting of the ice. But the problem we have on SRM is a big governance problem, because there it's not the free riding problem, it's the unintended consequences of somebody starting this without a proper code of governance that would limit the risk of unintended. So it's a long answer to your short question, but in order to say that this is a very diverse, complex, at the end of the day, we will have to make a collective judgment on what is the right coefficient. And my intuition, and this is work in progress, and I'm not saying anything about the conclusions, which I don't know, the economic issue is their big way. starting with adaptation, which, as we all know, is, for the moment, the resources available for adaptation are not at scale. And that's something which is already clear. And I doubt that the sort of 1 to 100 scale problem we have will be solved before we issue the recommendations of the Commission.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to turn to the audience for a couple of questions. I think I've probably got time for 2. Gentleman there in the black shirt. And the person behind it, was that a hand? Yes, yes, and the woman behind in the white blouse straight after you.
So thank you very much for your exposition. My name is Willy Delvani. I'm a doctoral researcher on the question of ecological intervention in international relations, and I analyze the interactions of European powers and the Amazon rainforest preservation question. And I would like to ask Professor Ines Camillone, from your point of view, is there any possibility for this free trade agreement that is being negotiated between the European Union and Mercosur, which is going to augment, to expand exportations between those two markets to, in any sort, tackle this degradation, this climate degradation, and the degradation we are already observing in South America in the cycle of water with the deforestation of Amazon rainforest? Is there any real thing that this free trade agreement could do to tackle it, or it is impossible, or even could it mean the opposite direction?
Thank you, and if you could pass the microphone, yes. Ines? Yeah, I think, because that's a direct question to you.
Well, I'm not sure what will happen with that agreement. We have a huge deforestation in South America, and also in my country, from Argentina. We have a great competition for the land to produce food, and also for agriculture, and for the protection of the ecosystems and forests. So this is a key issue for every developing country. I think we relied on many of these economic products for development, and for to produce food to export to other countries. So it's really difficult, and we also have the impacts of the climate change in this region, because at least for the last 2 or 3 years we have one of the most severe droughts in the northeastern part of the country, which is the most productive region in Argentina for food, and also for the energy production. So we have all these issues, these competitions, and we also have this fracking in Patagonia to produce more oil. So we are really very complicated because of climate and because of the economy. So I'm not sure what will happen in the next years, because we also have some political issues too.
Thank you very much. Yes, your question.
Thank you so much for hosting this session. My name is Katharina. I'm a master's student actually at Paris School of International Affairs. And my question would be, because in the beginning you stressed that the Overshoot Commission is not a top-down commission, but it was rather like a bottom-up initiative. So with the policy recommendation that you're working on, what do you think is the right forum to address it? Because you said that you would, like the COP28, for example, would be a good forum. But are you thinking of other forums, for example, G20 summit, or even other more, let's say, local forums? Because I feel like in the past we've seen that well, the agreements that are been working on such high level, it's just very hard to get them very concrete, whereas your Commission's recommendations, they are very concrete. So are you thinking of other committees or forums to address them?
Thanks very much. And before you answer that, let's have the question from someone. Yeah, there we go. Very self-organizing.
Okay, I'm Andrea. I'm also a student from the Paris School of International Affairs. I'm going to ask a political question. It's not very technical, but I think it's maybe an issue. And the question is, what to do to get on board, to have on board also those countries that perhaps may have an interest in having an increase in global temperatures. And I'm thinking about Russia.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm actually going to go with that one first, and maybe we could start off with you, Janos. And could you pass the microphone back to the gentleman 2 seats behind? Yes, thank you. Janos,
So
what about the people who like it hot?
Well, this is going to be very challenging because there are, even if maybe on the whole, let's say the world would want to have lower temperatures, there will be some who want more temperature reduction, others will want less temperature reduction. So the governance in negotiating between so many different countries and so many different positions will be difficult. But, you know, there are many difficult issues in the world. We just have to find a way to tackle it. Now, in this case of Russia specifically, it's not so clear that Russia is actually simply interested in a warming world, because in Russia there have always been at least 2 major forces behind the climate discussion. One is the economic interest, who are looking at exploring more gas and oil from the north, and there's the other, which is the total I don't know how to say, collapse of the Siberian economy because of the melting of the permafrost. So these forces have been, you know, negotiating internally, and sometimes there was a bit more positive, sometimes a bit less positive reaction from Russia. I presume there will be things like that in other countries, Greenland, some of the other Arctic countries as well. So this is a very difficult issue, but that doesn't mean we cannot address it.
And Pascal, the question about forums.
Well, that's a sort of downstream question for us. This commission does not have a mandate from anybody. So we are both independent and self-governed. Our view, my view, is that if and when we succeed in agreeing, having enough of a consensus on a set of recommendations, these will go like a bottle in the sea. There will be a public debate, and we probably will try to make sure that there is a public debate, and with various constituencies and various generations. Again, because your generation may not have exactly the same view as my generation on this sort of issues, and the sort of risk-reward balance which Janos mentioned. Normally, the sort of most adjusted governance framework to issue recommendations is the UN framework. I mean, the G20 can help if there is enough of an appetite on this. And they have a lot of dishes where they have to grow their appetite. Look at the agenda of the Indonesian G20. And not least because the climate issue is very much UN governance run for the moment, which, by the way, is a good thing because it's absolutely typical global good. Now, within the UN system, you have UNEP, you have a UN Environment Assembly, for instance, which may be a good place where to test a number of these ideas, provided we table something which is informed enough and politically palatable enough to float in such a discussion. So Again, sorry for a long answer. It's not determined for the moment, but that's the sort of downstream debate which I have in mind.
Thank you very much. And I want to say retroactively, I'd like to say that I give a mandate to the Commission. I think, and in my role as self-appointed mandator, I say that we should have this session again next year, and you can come back and find out what happened. Manuel, do we have time for one more, or do we have a hard out 1 hour in? Okay, well, if you're shrugging, I'll take that one last question because you've been very patient, sir.
Perfect, thank you very much. I'm Seamus Porter. I'm a undergraduate student at New York University. My question concerns more so finance, because it is very important. It's important to have ambition, but of course it's very important to have means. We talk a lot about nature-based solutions, reforestation, decarbon dioxification through solar radiation modification. These solutions have been favorably seen by large financiers. Unfortunately, these large financiers are also large financiers because they're large consumers and polluters. I think of Exxon or Coca-Cola, Frito-Lay, BP. So my question is, coming out of the Paris Peace Forum, coming out of the commissions, what are going to be the strict measures to ensure that these financiers, if you do intend to make partnerships, are not making these partnerships out of the effort to push back the timeline on their emissions, for example?
Arantxa, what do you do about people who operate in bad faith?
Well, you mobilize people who want good faith. And we've heard a lot of young generation here. I think a big part of this debate is agency on the side of younger generations, making sure that they use the agency that they have, that you use the agency that you have. I was very struck when we started the academic year in Sciences Po in August. We inaugurated this academic year, and the first question I got from a student was, if the well is broken, why should I care? And this speaks of people thinking they have no agency. Well, you have agency. You are consumers of Coca-Cola. You are users of the banking system. You decide how many shirts and how many jumpers you use and you buy. You decide at which degrees you put your central heating. You have agency. Now, this agency is not the only ingredient that we can use. We need more than that. But if we start using the agency that we have, that you have, and I'm thinking of the younger generation because this is also a generational debate. And this generational dimension we need to keep very much into account. Use the agency that you have. One thing we can do with the Overshoot Commission report is give you more agency. Give you solutions that you can then work to discuss, debate, implement, and transform into action on the ground. But the big word is agency. Agency that we need to use if we really care about climate change, which surely, at least in this room, we do.
Thank you very much indeed. So, Generation Overshoot. Go and do good. But before you go and do good, or as a way of going to do good, at 16:15, we're going to have a round table in room 2 that will continue some of the ideas of this discussion with an overlapping but not identical panel of speakers. So please come and join in the conversation there, which will be slightly more interactive. But for the time being, I'd just like to thank all our panelists, including Agnes bravely paneling on from Nairobi. And thank you all for being an excellent audience. Thanks very much.